Welcome back, everyone. It's really nice to be with you today. And today we have a special guest. We have Moses Siregar to share ideas about flower essences and how he weaves that into his life and work with astrology. Moses Siregar is one of the world's leading experts in the field of locational astrology or astrocartography. With 29 years of experience and practice as an East-West astrologer, combining the best of Western astrology along with Hindu or Vedic astrology. Once upon a time, he had a flower essence line called Grace Flower Essences and has been passionate about vibrational remedies since the late 90s. He was the first president of the Association for Young Astrologers and now organizes the Blast Astrology Conference in Sedona, Arizona. Welcome. It's really good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on for a few reasons. One of them is we both are very interested in astrology. And the other is we also are bringing on people who are using flower essences in their practice who aren't necessarily strict flower essence practitioners. So we're really interested to hear how other types of practitioners bring flower essences into their practice.
Awesome.
So perhaps you can get us started a little bit by telling us, kind of where your origin story perhaps and how you got interested in essences. And I think I know that astrology certainly came first. I mean, you were born into an astrological household, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's been around since I was quite young. Before I was in the womb, my mom was studying astrology. So that's been the destiny all along, apparently. Yeah, but essences are a different story a little bit. So I was in Athens, Georgia in the 90s going to college, University of Georgia. And I was like the super hippie, man. I had this student organization called SHARE. It originally stood for Seeking Harmony and Reaching Enlightenment. And then my buddy took it over and he changed it to Reaching Everyone. I said, that's fine. We can do that too. And I ran this magazine called The Catalyst. And it was, I was a college student. I was running this thing out of my bedroom pretty much. I had like 13,000 copies around Athens, Georgia. The first edition had the quote from, I believe it's actually originally it was ascribed to Marianne Williamson, who's actually in the news right now because she's trying to run for president. But there was that quote, that what we fear most is not, our light or our darkness, but our light sort of thing, right? And I think that was actually a quote from Nelson Mandela, if I'm not mistaken, but it was sometimes attributed to her. And anyway, the first copy had that right on the cover, And so it was. I was really quite into raising consciousness as a very young 20-something-year-old guy. I'd gotten turned on by a lot of really cool channeled material. There was this Hilarion that was channeled by this guy in Toronto, and just opened my mind to so many things. And so I was out there doing all these things. I was organizing, events and just a lot of community service, and somehow I just was very awake. And that channel material had turned me on to, like, his message was essentially that there's a tribulation coming for planet Earth, and we need to do something to raise the consciousness before we get ourselves into a giant mess. And I guess that stuff was channeled in the 80s. It seems more true today, when you think about it. But I actually took that very seriously. And so I decided, okay, then I'm going to do what I can to try to organize gatherings for world peace and all these kind of things. So I was really turned on. And a buddy of mine named Todd Byington, who he eventually went on to be in a band in Asheville, North Carolina, that was quite successful, where they were playing, oh gosh, what was it? It wasn't Blue Oyster Cult. I forget. It was another band kind of like that he was in. That was quite successful over there in Nashville. Anyway, he had a big old beard, and he worked at this place called the Phoenix Market. And this was this really wonderful hippie health food store in Athens, Georgia back then. And so, people would walk in there, just, everybody off the street in Athens, Georgia. And there was just a complete selection of hippies to help everybody find the herbs that they needed and the flower essences that they needed and all these sorts of things. So, he turned me on to the Bach remedies, basically. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm open to things. Like, I'm very practical, I think, by nature. If I see that something works, I want to use it. And so I read over a list of Bach flower remedies. And I was at the time a very uptight kind of vegan. Like I was very strict in my diet. And I was just very much like that. And I believe rock water was one of the key ones that he had recommended to me at the time. And this is how I knew that they worked, because I started taking this rock water and maybe a couple other ones. I think I took pine back then. And basically they all worked brilliantly. But the rock water story is kind of funny, because this is going to sound silly to some people, but after starting to take this thing, I remember walking down to a gas station and buying a Snickers bar and eating it. And that was so completely out of character for me at the time that I was like, what is going on here? Next thing I know, I'm in this diner right downtown in Athens. There's this famous diner. And I order a chicken sandwich off the menu. And I look around the restaurant like people are going to judge me for this. And I'm like, wait, no, this is normal. People do this. And I never actually, I don't think I ever ate another chicken sandwich after that, but I did it that one time enough to know that, it just loosened me up. And I could see this is something, this is really something. So that was kind of how I got going. And then, I think pine helped me with some of my self-judgment, at the time and things like that. And then I just became really passionate. I just wanted to try each one. I wanted to share them with my friends. I wanted everyone to try them and see what they were like. And then ended up moving over to Boulder, Colorado, and then Durango, Colorado. And I got really into essences. I was really into learning them, the FES essences and the Bach remedies at first. Eventually got into the starflower essences, which are really neat. They're based out of Santa Barbara. They get a lot of their stuff from Peru. Like, they'll have these orchids that grow near Machu Picchu. And I just became, like my own little flower essence practitioner, just learning them one at a time and mixing blends for people. And I had all the bottles out there. People would come into my little office and I'd do astrology readings, and I'd mix the little flower essence bottles. So for the longest time, astrology and flower essences were my thing. And I felt like the flower essences gave me something I could give people directly to help them with things that, a 2-hour astrology consultation could only do so much to, maybe illuminate some things. And that can be incredibly valuable, but to have something that could actually sort of go right in and change something on an emotional level, a spiritual level, and kind of attract a different energy to someone, I still to this day, I think it's the most incredible thing. So I love them so much, but there's only so many essences I tend to recommend these days or work with. And I really respect the flower essence practitioners out there who do this work. And one of the reasons I gave up on it is like a main thing that I was doing is because I got a little discouraged, I think, that people weren't understanding them as well as I had hoped that they would, or they would take them and they'd say, oh, well, all those things that we talked about are doing better, but I don't know if the essence is helping with it, I'm like, yes, it's helping. That's exactly what we talked about, or it just to see people not quite take them as seriously as I thought that they should. I think it got to be too much of an educational effort. And so, that wasn't eventually the thing that I chose to really focus on, but there are still some things I recommend, quite a lot. And if anyone is really open to the essences, I love turning them on to them, because I feel like it opens up such a world of grace, so many things that you can help yourself and your people with such little effort. Really, it's not very expensive, and you don't have to do a whole lot, and all these miraculous things happen. So I think they're the coolest thing ever, and I would love to do even more with them, but I do a lot of astrology these days and locational astrology, and that's kind of more where the universe seems to want me these days.
Isn't that the truth, that it is such an educational effort, because it's a subtle vibrational modality, right? And I think we're so used to being hit over the head with pharmaceuticals or something really strong, and that's usually what people, how they attribute when something's working, is to feel that sort of biochemical immediate reaction. And people were, so many people aren't used to following those subtle changes and then taking a look and seeing how they've been working. But I wanted to ask, when you're with the natal chart, do you see patterns emerging that lend themselves in the natal chart to certain essences for people based on those patterns? Or how does it come about in your sessions where you decide what essences are useful for that person?
Yeah, I never was someone that would sort of associate them a whole lot with and I apologize, I'm actually looking up my friend's band because I feel terrible. I remember it was called The Lost Chord. And so does anyone remember what band that is? It had The Lost Chord. Anyway, I'm gonna figure this out. Because I'd love
to be sure to put it in the show notes too, because you got to credit people, right?
Yes, he turned me on to essences, and he was in this really great cover band. As soon as I find it, I'll tell you guys. But it's one of the big bands from the 60s and all that. But anyway, yeah, I never really, necessarily linked them up like that. My thing was always, if I was going to work with essences with someone, I would just essentially say, if you could write a blank check to the universe for anything you want help with, maybe something emotional or spiritual, or on a mental level, more so typically than physical, although there are essences that I think that can help with some physical things too. But it's more on that subtler level. What would you like help with? Or what would you like to have more of? What would you like to be able to access more easily within yourself? What do you find yourself struggling with? And I would just try to let people talk and say what their thing was, and then I would just start taking notes, and then go over all my books and everything that I knew, and try to figure out what would work for them. So, you can make some correspondences between some of the astrological pieces. I mean, you might have a real typical Virgo person, and they need like crabapple and pine or something like that. Or, maybe a real typical Taurus person is, kind of taking everything on their shoulders, and they need like elm and oak or something like that. So you can do some of that. But I always like to be as tailored to the individual as possible. And I think if you work with enough essences, you can really do that. Right? You can just really try to address what they've got going on.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that there's this hesitance to become super prescriptive, like all Geminis need this, and all, and it's everything's always so much more complex and so much more interesting than that. And there's also so much development that happens over time, like when you're offering essences to someone, they may have really needed this month, but the next month maybe they don't quite need that so much, and they've evolved into something else. And things emerge over time. So to sort of have a hard list of this is what we offer for this person is, it's not really the way things work anyways.
Right. And I did find it. It was the Moody Blues. There it is. So you guys look up the Lost Chord Moody Blues tribute band. They've got some stuff on YouTube, and just a really sweet, beautiful soul who was in that band who helped turn me onto flower essences. So there we are.
Well, we can definitely thank him for that. I know that one of the essences that you've mentioned that you use a lot, and we'd love to talk about a little bit, is wild oat. So often people come to you, I'm sure, and certainly come to flower essence practitioners like us with like, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing. Why am I here? What is going on? And it's kind of a little bit of a tangle to come to try to pull apart. And I know that you mentioned that you use wild oat in these kinds of contexts. What have been your experiences, if you have any?
Yeah, that is the one I've recommended roughly a bazillion times. Now, what's a little tricky is wild oat is not actually from a flower, if I'm not mistaken, right? Do you guys, what is it actually from? Do you know?
Technically, it is a flower of a grass, right? It doesn't look like a flower in the way we think about it, but it is the flowering scape of the grass, I believe.
Okay, cool. Because some of those like rock water, that one's not a flower, right? It's like, so some of the Bach remedies you got to explain was kind of a flower essence, but so okay, good. Thank you for that correction. Yeah, but I have recommended it roughly a bazillion times. I'm glad to know that it is actually a flower, so that makes it easier to explain to people. But so you see me, I'm very practical. I'm just like, this works, take it. I don't necessarily even know how to explain what it is exactly. I think, yeah, that is an essence that keeps you on your path. The red carpet kind of rolls out in front of you, and you just walk down the path. So it bypasses, this is my take on it, of course, it bypasses your conscious mind and all the ways you typically kind of get in your own way. And it keeps you where you're kind of supposed to be. So if you're lost, it helps you. If you need money, I tell people there's been multiple times in my life where I've not been quite sure who I want to be when I grow up. I need to figure out how to make more money, or I need to get on, my path in some way. And I'll take wild oat for a year straight. Even if I take other essences, I'll mix it into my formulas and keep taking it. And at the end of that year, there's no question. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It seems so obvious that I am where I need to be. Now, I think sometimes you could take that one, and maybe you're not in a phase where you're supposed to be all gung-ho about your work, because your chart's all gummed up with mucky stuff for a while, and you can't really make the progress that that part of you wants to make nonstop all the time in this very masculine go kind of world. Well, sometimes we have to stop. Sometimes we have to be lost a little bit. Sometimes we have to slow down or heal. We got to process things. We got to wait for the right timing. So it's not that taking it always necessarily, gets you in that speed boost forward in your life. But it does seem to keep you where you need to be at any given time. And when it is time to kind of do your thing, like it really seems to help attract things to you to get you going. So, a lot of times people are saying, who should I be when I grow up? Essentially, what kind of work do you think I should do? And so, I can try to read that through the chart and tell them, well, you have this incredibly strong Venus, and therefore these professions might make sense for you and things like that. But at the same time, I know that if I recommend wild oat and they take it, my job's kind of done in the sense like they will attract it to themselves. Like the essence will attract that vibration to them. So I always feel so good about recommending that. And I always like to say this is like the best ROI of your life. Like the return on investment for a $15 bottle of wild oat that you can refill is my opinion. Just keep refilling it. You don't even have to buy it again if you don't want to, and keep taking that thing. It will keep you on your path. And so imagine how much, literally even how much money that thing is probably going to make you if it really helps you to do your work. You find your calling and to get going with that. And these days I do a lot of helping people figure out where to live as well. And that's another thing where it ought to help. It ought to help people stay in alignment with where they kind of ought to be in life in general. So I a lot of times I like to put a good, 2-3 minute plug for wild oat into a session, because I know if they follow through with that, it's going to do miraculous things for them. And I just think it's just the most incredible thing. I mean, I just don't know anything that you could put so little money and effort into and really achieve so much of an effect, so much change just based on a little bit of an effort like that. So I think if I'm not mistaken, Bach considered that one of his two most important essences. I believe it was that and holly were the two. And holly, I guess you can see because, it helps with the heart. I mean, if there's jealousy and things like this, like, it keeps your heart more open. But wild oat, it's hard to say something's more important than the heart, but at the same time, I just feel like wild oat is the one. It's just so miraculous like that.
Well, it's so interesting because I believe Bach called it the direction finder, or it's known as that. And there's a drawing, I believe, where wild oat is in the middle, like a compass, and all the other essences are around it in a circle. So I think that's really interesting, considering your main modality of locational astrology, that compass metaphor. And maybe it's a good time to explain what actually that is, what astrocartography is.
Right. Well, astrology's been around for thousands of years. There's parts of it that go back to India 5,000 years ago, talking about the nakshatras. And so it's been a part of the human experience for quite some time. I think it's a gift from the heavens, if you will, that help us to understand and see ourselves in a sort of cosmic mirror that's always there and always on. It is increasingly mind-blowing and miraculous. I'm sure if you get into any field deeply enough, into mathematics or into biology or chemistry, you probably see like all the sort of the handiwork of the divine in all these incredible disciplines. And I've had the privilege to do that in astrology now for almost 30 years or so. So I've gotten to see how this cosmic mirror is always on, and it's always there to kind of, I think it's a gift for us to kind of understand ourselves better. So it was only about 50 years ago or so that Jim Lewis was a guy who was an American guy, and he came up with a thing he trademarked and called astrocartography. He was really brilliant. He came up with a way to, put on the maps these planetary lines or positions, and it would show things like where was this planet actually rising when you were born, and you could put that on a map, and you can see a big line that goes across the world, or at least one half of it. And you can see where it's setting, and you can see where it's culminating, where it's anti-culminating. And this is the start of a real serious interest in locational astrology. And I will argue, I don't think that what he did is the be all and end all. I think he was a brilliant guy who was really brilliant in terms of understanding the astronomy, how to map it, and then he figured out how to sell it, how to popularize it. I mean, just incredible what he did with that. But it was kind of the first thing. I mean, again, astrology's been around for thousands of years, and we had this American guy who comes up with astrocartography. So there's plenty of room for growth in terms of how it actually works. And I think what's really fascinating about it, and I guess I see it in my work, is that there was a moment when you drew your first breath, right? That's what astrology is kind of based around. You emerge from the womb, and you're sucking in oxygen outside the womb. And it's a big moment. It's a big beginning. And so the universe says, that's a pretty big moment for you. So where the heavens are sort of arrayed around you in that moment is indicative of, your karma and your life and your purpose and your nature and your destiny to some degree. And so for so long, astrologers have been focused on timing for the most part. Like, okay, what's going to happen next year? We all want to know that. That's super interesting. But what about what's going to happen when you go to San Francisco, or what's going to happen when you go to London? That's kind of new. Like, astrologers haven't really been doing a whole lot of that for thousands of years. That's a really new idea. So I've worked out in my own work, and I this is true. I mean, I've worked with lots of individuals, couples, families. The locational part of my work have been focused on about 15 to 20 years. And so my best estimate is there's probably about 20,000 charts and places where I've seen where people have actually lived and been able to ask them questions about it. Typically, there's an intake that I have where people send me a list of where they've lived, and they say, "Oh, I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and I won the lottery, and then I moved to Tampa, Florida, and I got divorced 50 times or whatever." And I look at these things and I go, "Okay, well, do the way the planet showed up in those places when they were born, do they make sense? Does it seem to explain this? Does it seem to indicate it?" And so again, I'm a very practical guy. This stuff works. That's why I do it for a living, because it's so useful. And it's always on. It's like a cosmic mirror. If you go to Louisville, what was going on in Louisville when you were born, or Louisville or something like that, it's more the Kentucky pronunciation, what's going on when you were born is really relevant. It's always relevant somehow to the archetypal picture, the constellational background of what's going on for you in any given place. And some places are really, really rough, and everybody out there knows that. There's probably certain places you've been where it's like, no matter what you do, you can't seem to get ahead, or the family's always difficult, or relationships are always difficult, or and some places just open up for you, and they just have this magic for you. And a lot of places are something in between, these kind of mixed pictures. But the basis of what I do is actually based on things that were really true astronomically of the moment that you were born. And, what was, like astrocartography, what was rising and setting, that's part of it. What was culminating or anti-culminating, that's part of it. But there's all these other things too that are based on really real astronomy. We can say, oh, when you were born, these two planets crossed each other in terms of, one was rising and one was culminating at the latitude of, 50.35 north. And therefore, you always have this Saturn-Mars quality at that latitude. And, that's, for an example, that's one where you might work really hard and you might have like some nasty car accident or something like that. Like, these are strong gods. These are real powerful forces that kind of present themselves to us and say, well, here's what's here and here's what's there. And if you go right to where these lines are on your maps, or in the way that they line up in the chart in a really powerful way, it is absolutely stunning, like what happens for people, and the way you can predict what's going to happen for people. It is mind-blowing. So this is, I really think, one of the cutting edge kind of cool spiritual technologies, if you will. And astrologers are still figuring it out. I mean, I've been doing the work of figuring it out. And again, I had those 20,000 times I've said, okay, you lived in this part of, Germany, and it was like this, and it was consistently like this. Okay, now I understand why, because I see it's coming from Mars at your 8th house position, and you have Mars in Cancer, and yada, yada, yada. So there is a really observable correlation to all of it. And each person's their own snowflake, their own unique moment in time, and it always comes together in a unique way. But I genuinely believe that the universe wants us to be able to understand ourselves, and this is just sitting there waiting for us to study and work with and understand. So I'm just real privileged to get to try to be a part of that lineage in some way and kind of carry that knowledge forward.
I'm really intrigued by this, and I'm thinking about it from the angle of I study Chinese medicine, and that philosophical framework of, there's no all free will or no all fate. It's like a third, it's the heavens, it's you, and the earth. And the earth is the part that you can influence with feng shui. Like, where are you? And, who do you associate with? And I like what you're bringing in is like, this particular section of earth is probably much better for you than another section of earth. You're essentially doing what the equivalent of feng shui is looking to do. And you're coming out, you're zooming out even further out into a certain part of the world is perhaps more auspicious for you. And then you apply your free will as you engage with that. But things are going to go much more smoothly for you in certain areas versus other areas. It's really interesting how you're bringing this, these are ancient ideas, but bringing it into, you're able to advise people on, this is really not a great place for you to be living. Why don't you think about, some of these other areas instead?
Yeah. I had a client recently. She's about 40, somewhere around 40. And she'd lived in Florida. She's actually born in 1978, so she was a little older than that. But she had lived in Florida her whole life and had lived in a few places in Florida. And every single place had this, to me, this really straightforward, difficult sort of influence that would tend to make your family life a lot more difficult. And I didn't, I've seen these things enough that I don't really pull punches. I just tell you, this is what I think based on what I know and what I've seen. What do you think about this? And so I was able to say, I think every single place you've been has had a very, very strong influence that's probably made family life extremely difficult, overall. And she found it so affirming, I mean, it sounds like that would be bad news, but she was so happy. She repeated over and over how much she appreciated me saying that, because it was really true of her experience. And she had a difficult time with her family, moved away, came back, and it was still difficult with her family. And it was Mars in Cancer, which is the difficult sign for Mars, retrograde at her second house cusp, using the house systems that I use. And second house has a lot to do with family and Vedic astrology, for example. So I combine the Western stuff and the Vedic stuff because I'm kind of a scientist. Like, okay, well, what works? Show me the money, show me what works, whatever that is. That's my responsibility to tell people I've seen this do this very consistently. So to see those patterns and to know, this place always has this. Now, a lot of places are mixed. I had a client the other day, and she was in Oregon for, up and down Oregon. And it was like the chart was like sort of pulling in all the directions at once. And so she'd have these miraculous, wonderful opportunities and a difficult marriage. And she was like, figuring out her sexuality and coming out. And then she lost her church that she used to be a part of. It was like, it was like you could see. You have to learn how to see that picture. It's like you got to polish your mirror well enough as an astrologer to see what's in the mirror. And it takes practice. It takes, grace. So it takes a lot of grace, but yeah, it takes good learning, good research, good teachers. You got to really have an open mind to this and kind of how it works. And so every place does have its own nature, and some places are really good for certain things and not as good for other things. And so maybe it's good for this period of your life where you're not in a relationship. There's a lot of charts are like, well, if we can punt on relationships for a while, this place offers you all these things, and it really depends. I mean, some places, as you might imagine, some places that might be the best for your spiritual development might be the worst for, a lot of the other things that your ego wants out of life, the typical stuff that we all want. So it just depends. Occasionally I have a client come to me and they're like, yeah, I don't want all the typical stuff. I'm not really asking for friends, love, money, all that stuff. Like they want moksha. They want a spiritual liberation. And like, I can recommend a whole different chart to them that, 95+% of my clients, they're not looking for that kind of chart because it's going to really challenge their ego and they're not going to get what they want. But there's, so it's just so cool. It's just so cool how every place has its own kind of purpose like that. And then because it's very precise, you can really look at where the lines are and you can say, well, okay, if you're here at this latitude, this is going on. But if you go 30 miles north, the picture changes in such a way. And so that's really empowering. And then I love to give people precise positions that they can visit and go to, and then have experiences that blow them away, because these lines are really powerful. It's like the gods have shown up in certain places, and if you go to those places, the gods have sort of agreed, okay, well, we're going to show up because that's how, I don't know, that's how this whole thing sort of works. I mean, if it doesn't work like a mirror that's always on, if you will, then it just doesn't work. So you can go to a place and immediately the energy changes because there were different gods showing up in different angles to the sky, essentially, in different positions of the sky when you were born. And it's always there. It's just a miracle, like life, I guess.
So I'm kind of imagining it as like personal ley lines.
Yeah.
They're sort of these latitude and longitudes are like the ley lines, but totally specific to a person. So I could have one person could have a completely different experience at a certain point on the map than somebody else.
Right.
That's what you're saying, right? Are there any kind of places that are more likely to have good energy for a lot of people, or is it just really completely specific to the chart?
I think it is really specific to the individual. There are certain parents, the ones that exist in latitude. There's certain ones I tend to see at more latitudes than others, but it would just be probably a slight thing like that. So overall, yeah, it's quite like that. So for example, one of the techniques is called local space. And there's a guy named Michael Erlewine, who's one of the first developers of astrology software. He came up with this concept. It's really simple. You can think of it like, let's say wherever you are right now, it's daytime. You can think of where's the sun in the sky right now, and you could point at it, and then you could basically draw a line in that direction. You could draw a circle around the Earth in that direction. Well, that's local space. It's as simple as that. So the sun is over there. We're going to draw a circle that way, and Venus is over. Well, say Mars is over here. We're going to go that way. And so that one's really neat because everything's coming from where you're born, and you'll have all these circles that go through that place, and they go different directions. And it's fascinating to see people that sometimes will just kind of follow the circles, and they'll have like a Jupiter experience everywhere they go around a given circle, or a Saturn experience everywhere around a given circle. So I love that it's just, you can explain it like that. It's just it's a real thing. It was really true the moment that you were born. And so I love stuff that's like very grounded like that and explainable. And then everyone has their own patterns. It's just fascinating to try to kind of put that puzzle together for everybody. So some people are quite lucky. They can go a lot of places, and I can find, I might be able to find 10 good places for them around the country. And some people, occasionally it's just like, geez, maybe this isn't quite the right country for you. And occasionally people are like, I've always felt that way, and I'm like, well, it's really hard to find what I'm looking for you here, actually. So maybe, so everybody's different. You gotta, just like a flower essence, you gotta really take that individual into consideration and kind of come with a beginner's mind every time and learn what you can from their history. And it's great to see their history. That's why I asked them, send me a history of where you've lived and give me some notes on what happened in each place. And then I had a client the other day where she had this thing with the south node of the moon. They call that K2 in India. So this is an indicator in India of potentially moksha, spiritual liberation. But that means that it's a really hard influence. It really creates a lot of problems in our lives, because if we don't have problems, then we don't look beyond our ego stuff. It's something deeper than that and beyond that. But everywhere she's lived, she had that aligned to her 12th house in such a way, which is the house of moksha, which is a difficult house, but it can also take you to a kind of spiritual liberation where you kind of outgrow your own egoic fixations and become more interested in service and art and, meditation and communing with the silence and things like this. But everywhere she lived, like she'd lived all these places, even from the Northeast over to New Mexico, and still the same thing actually lined up in a way that was very significant for her. And she'd lived with that her entire life. She was in her 50s, I think. And so there was a pattern there. Now who am I to say, well, you should or shouldn't have this pattern? But I can describe what I see. I can say, well, you've had this influence that's gangbusters for your spiritual development and really difficult for everything your ego wants. And then she can kind of decide what she wants to do with that. She could say, okay, I want to stay in this burning fire here and keep burning my ego up, if you will. Or maybe I want to try somewhere easier. She'd been a breast cancer survivor, and so on and so forth. So trying to see those patterns is so fascinating to see. Oh man, like the woman in Florida. Oh, you've had this difficult family line your whole life, and then it's so much beyond my pay grade, because initially it was just I was a younger guy doing it. And I'm thinking, well, we're helping people find everything that they want, right? That seems nice. But the more I do it, the more I go, I think your soul wants certain things and your ego wants certain things. And I don't, it's beyond me to say what you should have. I certainly can't. But I can say, yeah, this place seems to give you more of the friends and money and all that you want. And this place is a place where maybe, some places will emphasize like the 8th and 12th houses, for example, in such a way that if you're doing really truly spiritual service, maybe you're a psychotherapist and you're really helping people, or you're doing some really deep work with people, like these positions might let you do the most profound soul fulfilling work, and yet still challenge you emotionally in a lot of ways that don't necessarily make your life as easy as you might want it to be. But interesting that you've lived here for 20 years and you've done this amazing work to help all these people. So your soul seemed to have chosen this for you up to this point. Now, what do you do with this information? It's really interesting then when you get more choice in the matter. So my job is to try to translate it as well as I can and let the individual figure out what they want to do with that. And I try to say things like, well, I would think this. If it were me, I would go here if I wanted to do X, Y, Z, but not if I wanted to do these other things. And, and then we bring in the timing as well and say, well, you're entering a great new cycle of your life. You're starting your Jupiter cycle, dasha, in your Vedic chart, and that looks maybe a lot easier or harder than the previous cycle of your life. And then what do we want to do with that? Where does this place really align with the new cycle? And And these things they're real powerful. So people can put it together when you just kind of sketch the basic parts of it. They can really see how it works for them.
And, once again, we're looping back to the wild oat question, which is, what is your soul's direction in this life, and what are you here to experience, and what are you looking to accomplish? I really appreciate how you're not sometimes just being seen, like, yeah, my life's really been hard. And to have somebody mirror it back to them, like, yeah, I could see that, this is, it's not all sunshine and puppies here. You've been really grinding away on some really challenging stuff. And to be seen in that way it's really affirming, and it makes you feel like, yeah, you're right. It has been kind of hard.
And then you can track it too. So sorry to interrupt you, but that woman in Florida, that same line went up to Chicago. And so Chicago had something I liked for her a lot. Her exalted Venus was elevated in her chart, but it had the same exact line that's denied her a lot of happiness throughout her whole life. So we can literally say, well, that same thing that seems to be causing this goes this way. And it's right there, so it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So if you want to keep working with that, do that. But if you don't, here's your choice point. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
And you've been so kind as to offer to share with our listeners a little insights about what are some upcoming transits, because we're in early March of 2023, and there's a lot of really big shifts of some major planetary shifts. Would you be so kind as to give us a little bit of, a forecast of what to look for, folks?
Yeah. I tend to be kind of like really in the details, working with each individual. That's kind of my jam. So, but I do talk about the big stuff too sometimes. And so this is an example. So a couple other essences I have worked with a lot. Mustard and gorse I think is a really neat combination for people. Let's say they're dealing with, and again, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I probably can't say the word depression out loud or something like that. But let's say you're dealing with something akin to depression. Mustard and gorse would be a flower essence I would recommend to people to take together for that. So, and then I think a willow is another one I recommend sometimes. When we need to get kind of outside of our stories of how we're the victim and this happened and that happened, you get kind of caught up in your blaming and all that, instead of just kind of feeling the emotional thing that you got to feel and heal and then try to move beyond, like getting wrapped up in the story. Well, willow I think might be a good one for people coming up, for a number of people anyway, because Saturn's about to go into Pisces. This is in Western astrology, tropical astrology. We're recording this the day before this actually occurs. So Saturn is at the very end of Aquarius right now, and it's about to go into Pisces. So by the time anyone hears this, Saturn will be in tropical Pisces if it's in 2023. So the reason I say that is because Pisces as a sign, Saturn might be, what's a lesson here? What's a challenge here? Let's look at, let's take a real sober look at something that you're working on, like a lesson that's going on in your life in a certain way. So Aquarius, for example, might have taught us a lot of lessons about how do we want to work with people, and how do we want to interface with the world, and how do we want to, bring our ideas together to kind of, try to cooperate in some ways. But Saturn's considered strong in Aquarius. That's one of his signs, and it's not a difficult placement compared to some. Saturn in Pisces is going to be an interesting journey, because Pisces does correlate to, in many ways, the sorrow of life. The things that cause us to go through an emotional journey, which might lead to some spiritual realizations and greater kindness and things like this. But one of the shadow sides sometimes of the sign Pisces is this victimization type feeling of, woe is me, this happened to me. Now, there's a lot of real victims in life. There's people who've been traumatized all sorts of ways. So I'm not saying that, people shouldn't feel that sometimes they have been a victim of something. That, that's certainly a part of life sometimes. But how helpful is that getting stuck in that, right? That sense that you're a victim of this and that, so you don't move beyond that and move forward in some way. Pisces, when we're not doing Pisces right, we might get stuck there, and we might not take action and just kind of work through that and kind of do our best to take responsibility for, okay, well, here's what I get to work with. Here's what I can work with emotionally, given what's happened to me, and move forward. So Willow might be a nice essence for a lot of people as we work on this issue of, get beyond your story. I mean, it's a real story, and things happen to you, and you got hurt in certain ways. Maybe it seems like somebody did you wrong. Maybe they did, and who knows? But what are you going to do today? How do you go forward? And so Willow is the kind of essence that helps you to, as a Bach remedy, of course, just get in the real feeling of it. Maybe you just got to feel that sadness. Maybe you just got to feel the sense of loss. Maybe you have to grieve something that didn't happen the way you wanted it to. and then then go forward in some way, not get too stuck in that. So to bring that into, I guess, a flower essence point with Saturn and Pisces coming in there, I mean, on the world stage in Western astrology, Saturn has been in consecutively the last two signs, which is about 5 years. He's been in two of his own signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. He traditionally rules those signs. And Saturn's a lot of the structures in life, things like government, things like real estate, things like career. So, even though we're in kind of an interesting period of history, I think it's going to be interesting to see what Saturn leaving his signs is going to do in terms of the stability of the world and stability of governments, the ability that we've had to keep things together, even as people are actively trying to tear things apart in many places. So I think there is this possibility that March, I think astrologers looking at March 2023 is a big month because Saturn goes into Pisces, and then Pluto in Western astrology also leaves Capricorn and goes into Aquarius. As I look at that, it just seems like there's a destabilization that's part of what's going on, because Saturn is stabilization, and he's becoming weaker. He's going into this Pisces sign where things kind of diffuse and maybe there's like a sorrow story or something like this. And so that's changing. And Pluto's been in Capricorn for a while. And Capricorn is, again, about kind of, holding the line, keeping the structures together, and a lot of traditional values and things like this. And it's going to go into Aquarius. And Aquarius sometimes is kind of the rebellion. It is kind of the bucking the man, rebelling against the powers that be. So I think there's a new kind of rebellion wave, a new wave of a lot of people like to think of themselves as patriots, whether we would agree with them or not. I think Pluto going into Aquarius is going to empower too much of that, probably, because Aquarius in a way is we say it's a fixed air sign. So it's an air sign, so it has to do with ideas and people and how people kind of do things together, but it's fixed. So, air as an element isn't very fixed. Air goes all over the place, right? So it's kind of weird having a fixed air sign, because what is that like to have air that's focused in one place? And what it can kind of mean when it's in the negative side is more about how we get really fixed in our ideas. And we said, this is our philosophy, and we are the good guys, and those are the bad guys, and the men against the women, and the Democrats against the Republican, and all that fun stuff, right? So I think Pluto, which is such a power sign, such a control sign, such an intense planet, going into Aquarius, leaving Capricorn, I think that there's more of an instinct coming in a broader picture, because Pluto takes quite a while to go through a sign, where we're leaving a little bit of the sense of, okay, let's work together, and going into a different mode of like, let's get into our own camps, and let's believe what we believe and be against those people and those people. And so Aquarius has that possibility to come together and work for the future and work for humanity and do what's positive. But it also has this possibility for us to get more and more entrenched in our different camps and thought bubbles, and that's pretty scary, because if we start to lose the ability to communicate with each other, because your reality looks different than my reality fundamentally, then things are falling apart. Then it's not a cohesive thing anymore, and there's good and bad about that. There's sometimes things get too cohesive, and societies are just too much following a certain train of thought, and then maybe they need to shake things up. So it's going to be an interesting time, because March, Saturn leaves that place of stability, and Pluto enters this place of rebellion, and in a way, kind of a disruption. So I think it'll be a really fascinating month to look back on and say, well, what changed here in terms of the stability of the world, what became unstable, and how do we become, maybe more entrenched in certain ways that could be oppositional toward each other. But there's always a high road and a lower road, and astrology does a pretty good job at showing us the spectrum of possibilities there. And Aquarius and Pisces, those are the last two signs. So Pluto's going into Aquarius, Saturn's going into Pisces. And the last two signs, at their best, they are about the whole. They are about service, and they're about selflessness and working together for positive causes. So, there's going to be people that are riding that wave of the archetypal field, and they're going to, be transcending their egos and working more with people to raise consciousness and bring people together. Just as other people are going to get more deluded and more convinced that their idea is right and that they should go out and oppose all those other people. And that can be pretty nasty if it goes far enough. So it's always we're always kind of splintering off into the possibilities here, the lower vibration or the higher vibration of something. But definitely some huge changes coming this month, and everybody's going to see it in your personal life. Like April is going to be a different month for everybody than February. There will be some pretty fundamental changes, so that's always fun to watch as well.
It sounded to me like this description of Pluto going into Aquarius. I mean, that sounds exactly like Rockwater to me. That that fixed ideas, fixed
Right.
and needing to create more flow and needing to create more flexibility mentally around what we believe to be true.
Yeah. Yeah. If we could just get this stuff into the water supply, we'd all be good, but
And I love what that you were bringing Willow into it for Saturn and Pisces times, and it makes so much sense. I love to look at Willow with a little broader perspective, having worked with it and made essences with it and done some journeys with it. And I, Willow is a sign. A willow represents water, and it represents emotions, and the emotions inside of our body. I think it helps us really find where that pain is in
Mm.
order to work with it, in order to handle it, to release it, um to be okay with it instead of running from it or denying it. And so Pisces, can navigated poorly, can go into escapism and denialism, and the with Willow, I think it really helps to just be with it, to sit with it, to find to find where that pain is, that emotional pain. And the willow branches were used traditionally to make divining rods, to find where the water is. The willows always grow where the water is, and I always think about that when I think about willow essence. And then, isn't that interesting again, that we're coming back on this like direction finder, these kind of these spiritual tools to help guide us and to help find direction.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me think of how, when things are bad, with that escapism, right, that you're talking about. And Saturn and Pisces should challenge us around that, where, are we going to escape from that, the difficult parts of our reality, or not? And even going into Aquarius, all the air signs have something to do with mental health. They all relate to the mind. And the mind is a very powerful, amazing thing. And we can have too much of it going on and kind of get out of our mental center as well. So I think, in a way, this is kind of like a symbol of like, the crazy parts of the world are going to get, or individuals, we get a little crazier. We escape a little more. We get into our own kind of way of seeing things, our own conspiratorial mindset. I mean, Aquarius is in modern sense is ruled by Uranus. Uranus is the sky god. So that conspiratorial instinct is to see all the dots connecting, but maybe you're connecting dots that aren't really there, or you're making connections that don't really make sense between the dots. And so that tendency is going to still, I think, increase a lot. There's a shift coming toward the end of March where Pluto goes into Aquarius, where maybe people, connect those dots in ways where it becomes even more destructive. And that's a real risk of this. And so, we already have an opioid crisis. We already have a real serious crisis around these kinds of things. But yeah, Saturn in Pisces is going to drive that, I think even further. But it's a really important time for all of us that have been saying we need to get back into our meditation practice, like me. It's a really good way to work with that, because Pisces is also about how do we find the silence and the peace, and to keep our mind more balanced and peaceful. So Pisces is, if you will, is the 12th sign. You think of the things the 12th house represents. There's some connection between these things. And we do best in the 12th house when we find means of service, when we find our inner peace, when we meditate, when we find the art that inspires us, that kind of helps us connect to a bigger flow. So these are things that we have to kind of get into, and working with that emotional process, like you're talking about with Willow.
Thank you for these ideas. Boy, there's a lot to think about. And I'm now that we're starting to talk about essences and these transits, like, oh, what about this for this? So it's really an intriguing thought process of seeing, and we're all going to see how it interacts with our individual charts and the charts of our clients. And, like you're saying, everybody's going to be feeling these transits a lot differently. So thank you for giving us a little bit of a heads up about what's coming along.
Yeah, and just to go back to Mustard and Gorse, I mean, Mustard and Gorse and Willow, like in a way, that's a really great combination. Someone could work with to keep their emotional state a little more positive and uplifted, but also deal with the things that need to be dealt with. That might really help some people coming up to kind of face some things and then still keep the energy high. Because again, with Pisces, we don't want to get too stuck in the woe is me, the heavy, And that's hard sometimes because life can be really heavy, but these essences that they're right there, these vibrations from the flowers are right there to offer us, like, you don't have to get too stuck here, that there's help out there in nature and in the universe. And I just love that we can do something so directly that can just help us access, a different mental state, with things, and approach our emotions in a more healthy way.
I'm feeling wild roads too, because we've been through this, quite a few years now of this sort of dark intensity, and now we're emerging with this element of Saturn into Pisces, with this kind of deep reflectiveness of like what we've lost and what's been changed, and what, and to be able to find heart to keep moving. The wild rose gives us that encouragement. Mustard and gorse, I think of as being for the like really dense, heavy, physical feeling, depressive quality. And the wild rose is maybe a little more in the heart center of like, wow, this has been hard, what we've been going through.
Yeah. And then Gentian is a good one that's one for discouragement, isn't it? I feel like that's like one of the best ones for me in general. Just those times when I just, something happens, I get a setback, and I just, I can get a little discouraged, and I need to like kind of pick myself up and keep going, So if you kind of have that tendency to kind of get knocked back and then kind of slow down a little bit too much, that's another one I think that dovetails with the wild rose really well, as well. I love talking to you guys about essences. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, the Scotch Broom was coming into mind as well for that despair and pessimism about what's like world events and what's going on there.
There you go.
But this conversation is so fascinating. I would love to just sit with you and mind meld for another hour. But since we're coming along to the end of this, is there anything else you'd like to bring in, flower essence wise, astrology wise? And then also, do you want to tell us what you're currently working on and how people can find you?
Yeah, sure. I do have an abundance flower essence blend. That's been the main one that I have sold, that I kind of helped to, co-create, me and a number of friends back in Durango, Colorado, and gosh, 2000 was it? Yeah, I think so. We put together a number of, that was my flower essence line. We created this flower essence line together. But the abundance bottle was the one that probably has been the signature, kind of mascot of the flower essence line. So that one I do still have available. It's just something I still work with a little bit. And so anyone who's interested in that, it was a good blend of quite a few essences, but it really has worked for a lot of people in terms of abundance. It seemed to help with either like an internal sense of abundance or external, or both. It seems like it can kind of help with either one. So my website is www.astrologyforthesoul.com. Everything's just spelled out. You can also just Google Moses Astrology and you'll find me. And so you can always contact me through that. And I've been mostly focused on trying to, I taught my master class on holistic locational astrology that I wrapped up last year. I'm almost done right now with a follow-up practicum class for the people that wanted to, kind of go even further with it. So certainly if you know people who are into astrology and they want to really study locational astrology, unfortunately there's not like a great book to recommend yet. I mean, there are some but there's nothing, everyone will tell you, like, there's no book that really explains it as well as you want to have it explained. So first I did a class because I feel like it should be an oral thing. Like you should, hear the teacher, they should be explaining it, they should be showing you examples. So I created that, so that people that want to study it can access that if they want to. And the book is on the agenda, hopefully as well, knock on wood, to put out there. So mostly I'm focused on, working with clients in that realm, teaching people how to do this sort of thing. I do have a conference I'm going to try to put together. I've got some dates lined up, hopefully, fingers crossed, for end of March, beginning of April of 2024 in Sedona. I had put together something called the Blast Astrology Conference in 2007 and 2008. And there were a couple of really neat conferences that brought together East, West, old, young, and just all these different traditions in astrology, and put everybody in the same room together. So they had to hear all the lectures, and it kind of created this kind of neat thing in the community where like that kind of became a little bit more how people were looking at things after that. I think at least had some influence in that direction. So I'm looking to do that again after exactly 17 years after the first one in 2024. So that could be a neat event for people that want to check out some astrology in person in Sedona. That's hopefully coming back around again. And yeah, I just love helping people, and I just love getting in the trenches and just trying to solve each puzzle one at a time, and just see what everybody's got to work with, and how to kind of listen to what they want, and how to try to help them see what might support them in that, and then also to see what might be coming in the bigger picture as well, for them to kind of align with that better. So yeah, and you can find all my social media from there. I do Facebook and Twitter, and a little bit of Instagram, YouTube, but yeah, I'm going into a creative phase. Hopefully here, I'm feeling a lot of creative energy coming in, so I'm hoping to do a podcast and a lot more things. So I have a newsletter as well you can sign up for, and get emails as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your time with us today. We really, really appreciate it. And we've been looking forward to talking to you. And, we'll just see what's coming up for everyone. Thank you for, I can't wait to hear more from you. I know that I really enjoy reading your takes on current events on your Facebook posts. Really insightful about how how the planets and how the movements are interacting with current events, and it's really a wonderful service that you offer. So I appreciate those and appreciate what you do. So thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to hopefully crossing paths again in the future.
Yes, let's do it.
Absolutely. Thanks again, and can't wait for what's next, and hearing a future podcast from you. That's really exciting.
Yeah, the Holistic Astrology podcast is the tentative name for that. And I have an 11-year-old daughter. I'm waiting for her to be ready for us to do an astrology show together as well. She's interested in doing it, but I'm just waiting for the right moment when I feel she's really ready for it. So that might be on the agenda as well at some point.
What fun.
Wonderful. Thanks again.
Right.
Bye-bye now.
All right. Thanks so much. Adios. Aloha.